You are an entrepreneur, a business mogul, a future tycoon, and you've been looking for a podcast that knows and talks business like no other podcast in the world. This is the Biz Beatdown Podcast. If you're passionate about business or itching to start your own venture, or maybe you're already knee-deep in the exhilarating chaos of running your own show, we're dishing out the secrets, strategies, and the street smarts to help you not just survive, but thrive in the wild world of business. And now your hosts, Vincent Penix and Patrick Barber.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Biz Beatdown Podcast with both Patrick Barber and myself, Vincent Penix. Patrick, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm excited for this one.
I know, me too, man. Me too, especially right after the holidays. I think this is a good way to kind of kick things back into gear. So today we have a very special guest. Before I introduce the name and everything, I kind of want to run through a brief background. So very interesting life story. So he started from a war refugee to a teenage gangster to a high school dropout, all the way to an award-winning scientist at Oxford and Harvard in about 7 years. He went on to discover drugs as a professor and became vice president of a biotech company with a revenue of $1.6 billion. And then he decided to quit his career and go ahead and start his own company and become a founder of an 8-figure company as well. And so we're going to kind of just dissect all that on our call today. So we're very excited to have Dr. Pradeep Sacitharan. Did I say that correct?
That's perfect.
Okay, perfect.
Well
Pradeep,
done.
Thank you so much. Pradeep, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, quite excited. Thank you guys for the invite. I love talking to fellow entrepreneurs and kind of a business podcast. So it's going to be exciting. I'm a bit rough. I just got off the plane from Africa, so we're trying to do some business there. So forgive me if I'm not as sharp as these gentlemen.
No, I think we're all. I mean, we're coming just off the holidays, and I just got off a train from DC. I think Patrick, are you in Brazil or are you in Texas right now?
3 days, so don't worry about that. That's fine. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't be advertising that a lot.
Yeah.
we'll cut that out later. Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So Pradeep, we're super excited to be able to speak with you, and thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today. So I mean, I really kind of want to run through a little bit of your background, because I mean, just your life story, even before we get started into the business sector, is pretty interesting in general. So I mean, if you don't mind just kind of like taking us through, I mean, how about just from the first thing that I mentioned? I know you mentioned you're a war refugee. I guess where exactly are you based out of? And kind of please share a little bit about your childhood or teenage experience, whatever you feel comfortable with. We'd love to hear about it.
So it started. So my parents are originally from Sri Lanka. Okay. There's a brutal civil war, which has stopped now. So it's funny because my family is from mixed both sides. But my dad's side was politically involved a couple of generations, so we were victimized. So my mom decided one day, hey, your name's not Pradeep, it's Raj, and we're getting on a plane. So she smuggled me in the back of a truck into a plane. Brave woman, fake passports and everything, trying to get me out of the country. First time attempt, it failed. So I learned resilience straight away. I was 6 years old. Second time, we got to London. That's how we claimed asylum as war refugees. And when you come to London and US and so forth, I'm not sure the US, but you get allocated living space and accommodation. So we settled on what's called a council estate. For you guys, it's called social housing. And then, I was 6 years old, 6 or 7. And then that's where life got very interesting because, I always say you are who you surround yourself with, and you don't know what you don't know. So from 6 to, I think, 13, I was a very good student, got out, didn't get into much trouble, but then teenage years, the testosterone kicks in, you impress the ladies, you get bored a lot and so forth. So what happens is, I emulated the people around me, especially older people who were in ethnic gangs and so forth. Luckily, thank God, I didn't get into any illegal troubles, but I got into a lot of fights associated with gangs and so forth. One thing that saved my life is weightlifting. I was a semi-pro weightlifter. I loved Olympic weightlifting. So that gave me some discipline. Even if I wasn't good at school, I was learning short-term, long-term, and medium-term goals. I was learning biology. By the way, I love science, but I read more about muscle and biology than any kid there is. But guys, no one around us knew what a career was and what college or university was.
Hmm.
So I didn't understand what education was and really what kind of tool or what kind of opportunities it can provide. So I dropped out, saying drop out in terms of I only got very minimum GPA, literally nothing. So yeah, and at 16 I worked sales. So that's my early life. War refugee and settled in a certain area, and yeah, and that's how I find myself as a dropout.
When you say you were working sales, what were you? What was kind of like your first? What was your first job?
Yeah, so the first job when I left school was a kind of a it was a fashion design kind of a upscale boutique designer brand shop called House of Labels on Bond Street in the middle of London. So this is fascinating, right? So
Hmm.
we can have much money to travel and so forth, but London being the culture kind of pot it is, I used to see everyone. So from a young age, I could kind of dissect languages, dialects, faces, kind of posture, emotions, and so forth. So I think the EQ for me was just growing up in London. I learned so much about people. So that was my first sales job in that kind of boutique kind of designer shop. And then I moved into retail, kind of your grocery stores, and then went into bars and restaurants. I just job hopped here and there, and I was trying to lift weights, and still I was getting in trouble from 16 to 21.
Yeah, I think a lot of us were getting in trouble during those ages. So I understand, but I'm sure that I mean, I always say that like, especially like if your first job is in sales or your first sales job in general, just gives you a lot of those social and like you said, those EQ skills. So I'm sure a lot of that is still helped you, later on as well. So I'm curious though, like from the point that you're talking about, with 16 to 21, kind of getting in some trouble, kind of like getting out of high school and everything. How did you end up like at Oxford and Harvard? Like what exactly was that transition and what inspired you to come from one point onto the next?
Yeah, so so when I was 21, until 21 I was lifting weights. I was trying to get a
Hmm.
pro Olympic lifting. I was very good for my genetics, but I didn't have the top tier genetics. If those who are listening know weightlifting, they're
Hmm.
on 2.8 over 3 times body weight lifting. I was in 2.5, 2.6, but getting over three, it was very hard, no matter how much I was. By the way, I had another life where I lost 40 kilos, which was 80 pounds, 90 pounds as well, to the shape I'm in now. So I was a lot bigger when I was lifting, and I had to eat and maintain the sales job and so forth. But unfortunately, I don't know why, but I still got myself defending my friends and getting into a lot of fights here and there. So 21, I got into a serious fight, a gang fight, which someone hit me over the head with, and I went into kind of a mini coma for 4 hours. I
Mm.
always say, I didn't see God, any angels, or or the devil, or anything, and nothing went click, but just woke up and there was no family, no friends, no one, and just me. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I have a lovely opportunity. I'm in London. Let's do something. So that's when I realized, we need to do something. So, I said 16 to 21, I learned life is a sales game. And then I always say life is a risk game, sales game, and a numbers game. So I started learning about numbers and the amount of volume it takes. So I just started making phone calls. And the first three phone calls I made, we call it a community college here. It's probably the same as you guys, where a lovely woman gave me a chance to do an access course. So I got that kind of night school done and I got into a degree program.
All right, perfect. We're good. Hey, sorry about that, guys. We had some quick technical difficulties, but we're just gonna pick back off from where we were, because we were actually at a pretty good stopping point. So, hey, Pradeep. So I know that you mentioned, so you got into the fight, and then you went to kind of like a junior college, and then what happened between that and kind of the transition into you actually getting your degree?
Yeah, so from as I mentioned, 16 to 21, I learned about life and the sales game. Then
Mhm.
I say the next phase, I learned about the numbers game. Where junior college, it took me 3 phone calls, but I done that 1 year where you condense all the education and you get a shot at one thing. So it was science for me because I had that kind of sporting background, right?
Mhm.
So then I just put my head down. I just like, okay, by the way, even when I was young, if I wanted to, I wanted to be an Olympian. I want even if I try to do martial arts, I wanted to be a grandmaster. So when it's a natural progression, if I was doing science, I wanted to be a Nobel Prize winner now. So I wanted to discover drugs. That's the mindset I had for greatness, and it's always been in me. I don't think, by the way, this notion that Hollywood and people chalk that if you come from hardship, you have this kind of ingrained attitude to prove everyone wrong. I always say when I was running marathons or doing something hard, I never thought about someone saying, "Hey, you can't run a marathon" or something like that. That doesn't motivate you. You're like, "Hey, you got 1 km left, and my ankles are killing me. I just want to finish this." I don't think about a kind of some bully, kid in high school. It doesn't
My life
happen.
was hard, and so I'm gonna prove
Yeah,
everybody
Yeah.
wrong.
all that is nonsense. Hello, you can reflect back on it and what changes life. But even in business now, I'm digressing, but I don't think, hey, I couldn't get this bank loan or this kind of investor. I'm gonna prove them wrong. It doesn't work like that. So yeah, so when I was making those phone calls, I just thought, hey, what can I do to get better at everything? So when I was at community college, I said, what can I do? So every year my CV got better. So I got better grades. And then every summer I applied for internship. The first summer I worked for free in a lab. The second and third summer I got a scholarship for summer, so I didn't have to work in terms of retail or anything. And then that's when, I always been a big believer from a young age about visualization. And so I visualize things. I tell people very, very freely on podcasts. I wake up in the morning, I put music on, I walk around pretending I've achieved my goals. I don't care what people say. That's what I do, and it's worked for me. And I literally act it out sometimes, and I go through the emotions. I just don't see it. So yeah, so one of the big things I realized, even weightlifting, 3 or 4 seconds before the clean and jerk, I'm visualizing the technique, right? So I thought that's where I think I got it from. So when I wanted to get to Oxford, I thought, okay, how do I get to Oxford? So one of the scholarships I got was for me to go on a conference to Oxford. So I'm like, okay, now I'm actually here, so I can visualize actually being there, right? So the next summer, me being a kid I am and thinking, I just got on a train. I remember one of my professors actually, he told me, look, you're talented, but you're behind these kids because they went to private schools, their legacy and so forth. I'm like, okay. Then he told me, how are you going to get to Oxford? I said, that's easy. I'll take a train from Paddington. So that's literally what I did. I took a train and I just visualized myself. I walked around Oxford, shaking hands, walking into random buildings, just meeting professors. I'm like, all right, they can speak English better than me. They look a certain way, but there's no difference here.
Mm.
And then I was, I've never been too competitive. I've been competitive with myself. I think the trick is, even in business, is to play the cards you're given.
Mm.
So, I talk about my life being like a towel, when you squeeze the sweat or the water out. So that, you ever seen the DNA triple helix?
Yep.
And it's got joint and it's got letters on it. So I always think my DNA is like that towel, and you squeeze all the genetic potential out. So I'm like, how much genetic potential can I squeeze out, right? No matter what I do. So if it's weightlifting, I can get to 2.8. If it's studying, I can get to Oxford and Harvard. But how can I play my genetic potential? Forget everyone else, right? So then I started working on my CV, and then I got to a point where I made 47 PhD applications, and I didn't get in. So I thought, hey, I'm addressing this wrong because they're seeing me as a kid with no high school education from a kind of a community college, right? So what I did was I said, how can I transition? So I applied for 13 times, Life I'm Learning Numbers game, and I got a scholarship to somewhere called Imperial College London, which is between like, it is Ivy League, but not the Oxford Cambridge standard. So there I done 1 year masters, and then I applied another, I think 20 times, and then I eventually got Oxford's scholarship. So I got to Oxford and I just put my head down. I loved what I was doing. 4 years, just said I'm gonna hammer this. I just woke up early. I worked hard. I networked hard as well. I just didn't. I wasn't this scientist in the lab. I networked very hard in the evenings. And I think in 2017, I was the first in history to win the British, European, American Scientist Award all in 1 year. So I discovered a drug in my PhD. Then that's when I learned that life is a risk game. So now I'm 27, I got my PhD. Then I said the next probably 5 years, I was learning about risk. So this is where I challenged the system again, and I call this the second dropout. I dropped out of high school, then I dropped out a traditional academic career whereby, guys, it takes 8 years and a chance for you to be a professor or have your own lab. I said this is bonkers. So I went around talking to all these old professors, right? I said, look, I've got ideas for 3 drugs that for osteoarthritis. Can you give me some money or can you recommend me? I think I need around 300 million. They're like, kid, you're talented, you've done very well, but you're 27. It doesn't work like that. What you do is you do a bit of research, you get some money. You do a bit of research, you get your money. And remember this, now I'm talking to Nobel Prize winners and professors at Oxford and something around the world. And I realize now as a 27-year-old, even these great guys, they just know about the environment and data that they have witnessed and experienced in their life. They haven't challenged the system themselves. Even if they molded the system, they haven't challenged the system, right? So I'm like, all right, this is crap now. I'm not going to wait 8 years. So then I'm like, I've been broke before. Life is a numbers game, right? So I started applying for short-term fellowships. So I got to Boston on a Fulbright scholarship at Harvard for 9 months. I'm like, this is great. Someone's paying me. I've got 9 months experience. I learned from the best. I've come back, right? Then I was like, I'm broke. Come back to the UK broke. But everyone's like, oh my God, this guy went to Oxford and Harvard. No one knew I was broke. Then I saved my money. Then I got another scholarship and I went to France, the Sorbonne University, 3 months, learned a bit, came back, broke again. Then I went to Israel, time of my life in Israel. It's quite sad what's going on, but favorite country in the world for me. I had Arabs and Jewish and everyone around me in the lab. I learned something there, then came back. So now I've got this amazing CV, learned with the best mentors and people in the world. I'm like, hey, UK, can I have a fellowship? They're like, no. Now you're 29 and you haven't got a steady kind of career progression. You're just going everywhere. I'm like, well, I've learned so much than most people have done in 10 years. And I've done it in 18 months. I'm like, all right. I'm like, Pradeep, life's a numbers game, right? So what can I do? I'm going to digress a bit because this helped me in business as well. When again, visualization, I saved when I was at Oxford, I wanted to get to Harvard. I actually saved my scholarship money at Oxford and I booked the cheapest. Back then, it was the Norwegian Airlines going into Boston. I went to Boston, I stayed in a hostel and I turned up at a conference, just asked questions to all the professors, impressed them. And that's how I got my Fulbright scholarship. So I said, what can I do and which part of the world needs me? So I applied that logic. And that time, China was coming up very aggressively. So it wasn't me selling out my trade secrets or anything. It just, I had my own ideas and I just wanted drugs for humanity to publish. So when you publish, it's out there in the domain, right? So I went there to China. I made, I think, 272 phone calls. So it was easier getting to Oxford and Harvard, but harder to get a position because I was jumping so many steps. So 272 phone calls. It's crazy how I got that job, how the CV landed the right persons. So I got there, and by 29, I was associate professor. And then I had my third dropout and I went into corporate sales and science. So that's kind of my education and training background. And again, it's the kind of mentality of just persistent risk taking, numbers and sales, and selling yourself to the right people.
That's amazing. You just touched on it again, and you mentioned it earlier about life being a risk game, and I completely agree. However, one of the things that I find kind of sad, to be honest, with just humanity in general, is I feel like the majority of folks don't realize that. Why do you think that is? Why do you think most folks don't understand that life is a risk game? What do you think is behind that? Out of curiosity, I'm just
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So it comes down to, I think, look, you are the five senses, right? And all the data and visualization, or visuals, or hearing, or whatever that comes in, and it's just a system. If you grow up in the West, you go to college, you get a job, and you get a mortgage and so forth, and then you try to live a steady life, and most people are surrounded by people who are doing that, so that's what right. Even going to Oxford and Harvard, more brilliant people than I are out there, but they just went into steady stream incomes and so forth. And even if you go to Africa, where I've been, and the entrepreneur opportunity and hunger, it's 100 times more because they have less opportunity, right? Even they want to get to school. They all want to be doctors. By the way, it's noble being being doctors and lawyers and so forth. But even there, it's get a steady income, get a job, and so forth. And what people just don't know is, they read about the heroes, but most of the heroes were like zeros, and it's the risks they took in those lives and those times that made them. And it's quite sad that people just don't really delved behind it, because it's so fascinating, because there were points where people used to call me mad, and they used to call me crazy for the things I was doing, traveling around the world doing it. But then when they look at the achievement, they're like, wow. I'm like, guys, most of your people that you look up to are failing, and I'm not one of them. Don't look up to me, but most of the people I looked up to or read about, when you really delve deep, people are failing all the time. Um, and also the third point is the system, people you surround yourself with, and the third point, it's just hard. It's just hard to fail emotionally and mentally and physically. And after a point, life, you have responsibilities. It's just really hard to keep failing and keep going.
No doubt. I completely agree with everything you said. I personally didn't have that realization until about 2015, 2016. I was working a 9 to 5 at a career in project management in the oil and gas industry. And it kind of just hit me one day like, wow, I just kind of gotten a bit of a promotion to middle management, and, things were good, but I was working like crazy and just generally unhappy, and really kind of took a step back and realized like, wow, this is what it's going to be like for at least the next decade, if not longer. And then I was like, whoa, this sucks. I'm not okay with that. And I think that a lot of people, I think you're right. You grow up and you're told, hey, go to school, get good grades, get to a good university, go get a good job, and then everything will be set. And I think that the big lie, at least in my opinion, especially in America and honestly around the world, is that actually isn't true. That doesn't guarantee anything. In fact, the majority of folks that follow that blueprint, when they reach that finish line, right? Finish line being retirement and having all these things and blah, blah, blah. They'll actually, unfortunately, realize that they can't afford the life that they have been living up until that point, which I think is really, really sad. So interesting. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And also, most people are not making any personal development or progress. It's easy being in a career and learning, but when you learn and do something for yourself, it's a totally different feeling.
No doubt.
And,
No doubt.
and the challenges and the risks are what make it interesting a lot of times too. And I mean, and there's always like I think another thing too, to add to your points, Pradeep, is like there is always the possibility of failure. I mean, like that can happen, but like, I mean, like at least temporarily, there's the short-term failures, but if you just keep going, you keep pushing through, you will succeed eventually. Sometimes it takes longer than you expect. But I think that's another added thing too, is people are just like, the failure can be scary because it can really take you to some places that you've never been. There's points of discomfort, so Yeah, so anyway, so once you wrapped up like your education, like how did you end up? I know that we mentioned that you were like the VP of a biotech company. What was that transition like, and how did that end up happening?
Yeah, so if you remember, I asked for 300 million for three drugs. They're
Yeah.
like, it takes 30 years, right? And they're spot on because you don't do that in the West.
Mhm.
Uh, we discovered that the Chinese, it's a lot cheaper to do science in terms of the manufacturing, the equipment needed, and so forth.
Mm.
And you have a lot of manpower. I published my three drugs in a paper in my lab in 18 months. So in the West, they said 30 years. We done in 18 months. Obviously, it comes down to money and also people, but also the skills where I always say in anything, if you have a set of A to Z, it's how you use them to do the same thing over and over again, but quicker and more efficient, and you just don't start a new process again. So SOPs, software, systems, people, we just copied it across all three drugs and we accelerated it. And I learned that as well, and I applied that in business as well, and we can get on to that. So that was there, and I was very successful. Then someone just approached me saying, "Hey, you're very talented, but we need someone from your caliber in the West to start the business development arm." So the deal I struck is I still do the research as VP and I have my academic lab, but then I also do sales and business development.
Mm.
So then that was my kind of third dropout. So dropped out of school, dropped out of traditional academia, then dropped out of academic career as it went into corporate sales. So there I learned money works on different levels. Jesus, it works so much different levels. So during the pandemic, I worked out the best way to make money, particularly at that time for a corporation was to acquire. I always say this now, the best way to make money is to buy money. So we brought a lot of revenue, right? So I found myself from a council estate in Northwest London. I had a chauffeur, a private jet, and it wasn't like mine at all. It was a corporate, and it saved a lot of time. And the team was working on those cars and planes all the time, but we just landed across the world and we started buying up companies because the failure rate during the pandemic, because everything was so much, and other
Mhm.
companies were buying at a rapid rate. So you hear about a biotech going down by Monday, you hear about it. By Wednesday, they've been brought up. So you had to get there on site from China, I don't know, to France, talk to the lawyers, to wrap up the deal by Wednesday, Thursday, make sure. So for that, you need easy kind of a transport and so forth. So, but it showed me that how money works, and that was a kind of a life lesson I'll never forget. And once you get there, you don't never want to get back. So that's how I got into it and got into VP sales and so forth.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's that's definitely pretty wild. And we've actually, it's funny because in some of our other podcasts we've been covering like exactly what you're talking about with the acquisition and being able to, the best way to make money is buy money. That's something Patrick talks about all the time as well too. So I guess how did that lead to you starting your own company, and tell us kind of about how you founded that and what that process was like.
Yeah, so I was loving what I was doing and I was learning so much, particularly the acquisition side of things.
Hmm.
But the pandemic hit, and my family were like, "Hey, people are dropping dead. What's going on?" I'm like, "Everything's fine here. Everyone's going." And I kid you not, guys.
Kidding? I got a PJ and a chauffeur.
And, no, I kid you not. I always talk about Will Smith. I'm Legend. I'm Legend movie.
I'm Legend. Yeah.
Yeah. Where you see New York and he's with that dog and it's like dead, right? No one
Hmm.
there. And I didn't have a dog, but it was just me and Suzhou. Everything was just dead over a sudden. It was like everyone was on lockdown. It was crazy. The roads are massive, right? American roads, like American roads. And there was like fog setting in Suzhou. And it was like me walking down. There's no one there. And I was like, what is going on? So the university was shut, biotech was shut. We're all working remote and so forth. So I was in this expat community kind of flat where you had no kitchens. Everyone used to eat communally downstairs, the restaurants and so forth. So the kitchens and all the restaurants were shut. So they said all the expats go to this hotel, right? So I come to this hotel and I was the only foreigner left in Suzhou. Everyone had gone back home. I thought I'd risk it and stay on. I thought, yeah, this will blow over. And I kept going there because I had to eat and so forth. And I kept seeing these men with laptops and cigarettes and cigars, and just on their laptop, bing bong, bong, just typing away. I'm like, what are these people doing? So I'm very social, and I started chatting to them and so forth. I'm like, what do you guys do? And like, they're like, I'm like, why are you not locked down? They're like, we practically own the city. We have our own factories in wood, in metal, in silicon, electronics. One was doing combs, ridiculous things. I'm like, where do you sell this? B2B, on e-commerce. E-commerce kept coming up. I'm like, well, now I do sales, right, in VP level. Let me see your numbers. One guy was making just selling combs and silly things. He's making $400,000 with a 200% ROI. I was like, what is going on? I'm like, I need to get into this game. So I literally started a side hustle because I was fascinated. So during the day, I used to do high level VP and sales and corporate stuff. During the night, to win these guys over, I used to do Amazon customer case translations to help these guys out. And I tried to win them over, and I eventually did. And someone allowed me to sell these silicone toys in the UK. And with, I don't know if you guys know about e-commerce, and you have all these Helium 10, Jungle Scout, and all these frogs. I had nothing, no e-commerce support. I just created a company in the UK through VPN, and I started an Amazon store, and I just started sending toys in. I started selling toys, and I was making a tidy profit. I was learning e-commerce, but I was still enjoying my job. I loved my students. I loved what I was doing. Then eventually the pandemic got very hard to live in China. It's quite sad. So I came back to the UK. Came back to the UK. I was like, hey, this is my resume in the science world, right? In the business world. They're like, well, kid, you're 32 or 33. You're too young and overqualified. No jobs at that level. No associate professor jobs. No VP jobs. Went around for 8 months trying to get the same kind of job, or even I kind of downgraded myself. They're like, we can't fit you in because you're our upset apple cart. And that's fair enough, right? People will get a bit annoyed. So I'm like, all right, cool. And at the same time, my e-commerce was growing. Then I told my family, hey, you know what? I had a great stint. I loved science. I still, love reading about science. I started writing a book. I published a book on gut health. Still, even that didn't kind of quench my thirst. I just thought, you know what? It's done. I've done my bit for humanity. I've published. I achieved. I went to all the best places. I'm going to go and do my own thing, make money for myself. And, I found that the main thing is the freedom I had to work on things I want. And I was my own boss, which I love doing as well. So that's how I transitioned to my own kind of business.
Awesome. And where exactly is that now? Like for your own business, like how many people do you have working for you? What exactly does that look like?
Yeah, so I started off one-man show, and we had 3 verticals I built on. I have my e-commerce company brands.
Mhm.
We have an acquisition arm now. We're acquiring distressed assets in e-commerce and turning them around. So I always wanted the acquisition arm. The third arm is consulting. I figured out, by the way, all you business guys out there, I always think, like even in science, when you teach and consult, and if your company has a consulting arm, it makes you 10 times better, because you're seeing so many problems from different people, and you can learn from others and just implement in your idea. So we have our e-commerce brand, we have an acquisition of e-commerce arm, and we have a consulting e-commerce. We only consult with high-level distributors, but we learn so much. So those 3 things are the e-commerce vertical. And I've just started a new vertical in commodities, so sugar, oil, metals, because I want the business to have several verticals, that if one fails, I can always lean on others. And also, doing e-commerce, you learn that you're just a puppy. And forgive me, all e-commerce guys out there and girls and they and them. Because when you look at containers and what you're shipping in around the world, you're nothing compared to the commodities guys. Oil, sugar, metals, copper, and so forth. It's a different ball game. We're talking about, we just had a contract by another person in the same law for 856 million. for a 1 year deal across the world in commodities, and just that's for scrap copper wire, by the way, guys. Scrap copper
Yes.
wire, right?
Yeah.
So here I am branding and imaging, taking photos and selling on Amazon, but some guys just pick up scrap copper wire and selling for 856 million. Obviously, huge tonnage and vessels and container levels. So, I woke up one morning, I said, how can I think bigger? So that's what the verticals are coming to. We still are very strong e-commerce, but we're also now moving into commodities.
Interesting. Is China still your supplier on most of the things that you're selling, and including the
Yeah,
commodities?
yeah. So this is a very good point. So yeah, it is. It is. So every year it's like my lecturing. I change my every year I go around the e-commerce community. If they want me, I'll give a lecture to the community in different locations. So this year I'm talking about acquisition and why people are failing, because we went through 120 sets of data and we only acquired 2 companies, right? So last year I was actually talking about China supply chain. It's very interesting. Yes, direct answer to your question, China still is. What people are saying, hey, Apple and Samsung are moving to India. Mexico's taking a lot of the
Yeah.
Chinese market. But here's the thing, and we're seeing this in commodities as well. People forget China has a huge domestic market, right? And domestic market, they still need to serve 1 point something billion people, even if that's going down. So the world's number one import of raw material, the world's number one owner of most of these raw mines and so forth is China. So the cheap raw material side of things and serving a domestic market which big enough is still China. It's still going to be China for 5 to 10 years. So we haven't moved out to China. We'll move out. We don't want to move out of China because I have good friends and networks or so forth. But I still think if you're e-commerce, small to medium business, you still look at the margins. I still think China is your best bet now. Obviously, if you're more sophisticated like Apple, Samsung, so forth, you got different moving parts and you can afford to build a plant in South India or North India, wherever there is, you can do so. But if you look at what e-commerce other people have to deal with, China is still your best supply chain and it's solid.
No doubt about it. I'm obviously a staunch capitalist and proponent of democracy and all of that, but I'm currently located in Brazil mainly because my wife is Brazilian, and we're raising our kids down here to have exposure to that culture. But there's also kind of a backdoor play for us from a business standpoint where we're investing in real estate here in Brazil. We've started some businesses here in Brazil. And one of the interesting things about the Brazilian economy is their exposure to the Chinese economy. They're one of China's biggest trading partners, and we feel it. I see it every day here in the economy in Brazil. I've been to China personally. I've been to Tianjin and Beijing. I've been to Soju. I've been to Hangzhou. I've been to all of those things, and so I've seen how they do business there. It's definitely different. They definitely do things a little bit different, but there's no denying the fact that within the next 5 years, China and India will be the number 1 and 2 largest economy on the planet, period. And that is a real thing. That train is coming down the tracks. And I think it's interesting. It's wise of you, I think, to call that out. I think it's unpopular, at least in the United States, to make those statements. I was in the U.S. Back in November, and around some family members. I'm from Texas, which is like very conservative and that sort of thing. And so those aren't very popular things to say, but they're real. And in my opinion, it's almost factual. So very interesting.
And also, I'm doing it because it saves people's lives and careers and their businesses, right? There's no way you can afford some of the things that the popular media or the mainstream media are saying for small and medium business owners, particularly if you're entrepreneurs starting off. And here's the thing, right? I just went to Africa to look at, I was in mines and commodities, all owned by Chinese. Even the transportation laid for most of these commodities are Chinese. So, kudos to the Chinese because they've done their legwork. And when we were, the US built Europe after World War II, right? Infrastructure and so forth, right? Kudos to the US. but then the West has taken the kind of eye of the game, and because we were in wars for so long. But where the Chinese and others have built infrastructure for their own business, and we're kind of benefiting from those businesses. So, Brazil, Mexico, by the way, is fascinating. Is that a lot of people say we're going into Mexico, but the warehouse and logistics and the hotel, the factories are half owned, if not practically owned, by Chinese companies. So there's
Right.
no way getting around that. So I found out the hard way. So yeah, I mean, you still have to work, and I still think the supply chain wise, medium business term owners, you have to stick with China at the moment.
What do you think the geopolitical risk is, though, in the near to short term, with the exposure to China and kind of the unpredictability of how they like to operate?
Yeah, I get this. Look, uh, I'm British. I love the kind of country and society I'm in. If there's sanctions against a certain country, I won't do business because I'm British. And I agree with what my country states because I love my country, the same as you guys in the US. But if there's no sanctions, you have to do what's good for business. And as a small, medium term, or even as a successful, non-successful person, with all due respect, I don't know your background, but all three of us do not have any influence on the world.
Right.
We are nowhere near governance. We're nowhere near big money or the BlackRock kind of money. So
Mm.
we have no impact on Ukraine or the China policy and so forth. So we got to do what's good for our business because our business is paying our employees and putting food on the table for our families. And that's the only kind of circle that we can concentrate on. Eventually, if you make enough more money and so forth and have more acquisitions, you can be a big boy and play and dictate certain things. But at this, I always talk about centric politics compared to geocentric politics. It's out of my realm at the moment.
Yep.
Good
Completely
answer.
agree. Yeah. Unless you're Larry, you
Huh?
know, just get your piece of the pie wherever you can, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the pie is more juicy and bigger in different places.
No doubt about it. Tell us about Africa. That's a great segue to Africa because that sounds very juicy. What are you doing down there? What's going on? Tell us about that. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so to be honest with you guys, look, we went to buy a German company for e-commerce and it failed. The financing collapsed. So failure is part of the game. So I woke up one night, I'm like, okay, e-commerce, I've seen the ups and downs. I read the market perfectly. We acquired some distressed businesses, but it's going to get more and more expensive. These marketplaces are putting huge amounts of pressure on advertising and it feels like the algorithm favors them more.
Mm.
Yeah, it does. So I said,
Yeah.
how can one thing I do is every Sunday I go for a run, and I go to this same cafe and I say, how can I take a bigger risk on Monday morning? And if I'm thinking big enough, I ask those two questions. That day I woke up in the middle of the night. I'm like, hey, I'm pissed off. I feel the funding collapse, right? What am I doing differently? So I thought, you know what? I'm gonna go and look at commodities and see what commodities are actually selling more of a profit. And you know, everyone, if you look at the London or stock exchange or New York stock exchange, no one looks at the metal stock exchanges or the commodity stock exchange. They exist. If you look at the LME, London Metal LME exchange, sorry, London Metal Exchange, right? The prices are crazy. For a copper metric ton, it's 8,500. For tin, it's like 25,000. So I'm like, I'm missing this whole ball game, right? So I wanted to establish a metal commodities trading vertical. So I went there and I said, hey, the best thing to do is to get on the ground. If you go to Chile, Brazil, Australia, those mines are being brought for the next 20 years. The way you do it is artisanal mining in Africa. Um, and you got to look at the social, economic kind of angle as well. Is it socially responsible? You got to go out there, see the certain things and so forth. Can I tell you something? What I discovered? This notion of conflict minerals is nonsense. Uh, uh, most people are cooperating between enemies and just everyone's making money. Uh, this notion that certain things are kind of, I don't know what there's a fascinating guy I was talking about. Is it lithium? My chemistry's always been bad. It's the most abundant, third most abundant something on the periodical table. So I was learning stuff in Africa. He's like, if the guy's like, hey brother, where do you see lit? Lit is everywhere here, and we're not fighting over it. It's like you and your Western guys are making this up, right? There is no conflict minerals. So that's one thing I learned as well. So yeah, I mean, you got to go out there. I went out there. I just went around Tanzania, Zambia, um, parts of Congo. Some parts of Congo are very dangerous. South Africa. So I just went business, met miners on the ground, senior officials, and so forth. And that's what I was doing in Africa.
Interesting. And so I mean, I get that this is kind of a new vertical that you're getting into, and so feel free to
Yeah,
share
new
or not
vertical.
share. Specifically, are you basically networking down there for to export minerals out of Africa into other markets, or is that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
okay?
that's the play. Yeah, export metals, minerals. I'm not sure because they're harder in terms of testing and sourcing and legitimization. But yeah,
Mhm.
metals are easier. And also, forgive me, everyone, again, but I'm a staunch believer in looking at history. If you look at the history of business, the most successful companies, not Apple or Google or so, pound for pound or dollar for dollar, is actually the East India Company, right?
Mm,
And what did they do? They controlled the whole supply chain from raw material to the supply chain and the consumer. I know it's bad, they involved in slavery, colonization, and so forth, but they had the raw materials, they had the laborers, they had the boats, and they even had the consumer in their hands in terms of the British public and vice versa, the Indian public and so forth, or the American public. So how does one not emulate the East India Company, but if you look at Amazon, how you got to control the supply chain. So I was thinking, hey, if I'm selling on something on Amazon or I know the end market, can I go now to the other side and kind of dominate that or learn about that? So eventually, maybe when I'm 50 or when I have a bit more money, I can plug it all together and have a whole supply chain. So that's one thinking because sometimes I think everyone gets so engrossed in one part and one business. They should because they're growing. But am I thinking bigger, longitudinally as well?
Hmm. That's awesome.
awesome. A curiosity, I'm relating to a lot of what you're saying because my experience so far in Brazil has been similar. One of the things that I've noticed in being in an emerging economy, I guess it's third world, but I don't think that's popular to say anymore. We'll call it EM, right? Emerging economy. Um, One of the things that's really jumped out to me is that because it's a less mature market in many different ways, some of the common sense things or basic normal things that we do in countries like the US and the UK and more developed nations, those haven't really landed here. And so there's a ton of opportunity. The door's kind of wide open to come in here and just do those basic things and deliver those basic products and services in a really unique way, unique in the sense of how it's being received here to end users in this economy, and you can really crush it and really disrupt markets down here. Is that kind of your thesis and part of your thesis and what you're doing in Africa? And if so, great. If not, would love to hear that. And then in addition to that, what are other things that you're assessing when you're entering new verticals? What are the things that you're taking into consideration and really kind of using to drive your decision to move forward or not?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good point. When I entered Africa, my unique selling point is how do I bring my SOPs and standards and my networks in to really deliver quick solutions. And you talk about the common things that you can bring to a market, but what you're doing also the vice versa, you're leaving a market like the UK and the US with so much regulation, and you can do it so much quicker in other countries, right? Brazil, emerging market, and so forth. But for example, the banking regulations, and I look, I love my country, and you need these certain things, but it's come to a point, it's ridiculous. So you can't have a certain amount of threshold to transfer. You need this kind of paperwork, this safeguard, this regulation. It's crazy. I'm like, dude, it's
Yeah.
my money. I work for it. It's my business. Like, how can it you? I KYC ML checks are needed, but it's come to a point where we had some client that's giving us $3,000 for just a one-time, sometimes e-commerce. It's very small amount. We had to answer 8 to 9 questions and be on the phone for one kind of hour. So I'm like, this is getting ridiculous. So it's vice versa. We can do so much things quicker in emerging markets. So yeah, coming back to your question, we wanted to bring the unique points of Donsville, my company, in terms of supply chain, logistics, and established networks in China and Asia to get more steady metals into these countries. And the whole point was we've wanted to facilitate banking and financial ease of transactions in the African country, which is notoriously hard for these miners. Um, uh, Basically because they've been stereotyped into saying, hey, something can go wrong. So we wanted to go in there and help that, do those basic kind of transactions with them, being the middleman or being actually buying and selling as a trader.
Awesome. Fascinating.
On the I did have a quick question, like on the e-commerce side of things, because this is something that I've just honestly since we've been doing this podcast been interested about, is like when you're looking into acquisitions and you're looking to acquire companies. You mentioned that you'd only like really acquired two, but you had evaluated a good amount. So like, what are those things that you're looking for when you're kind of looking into acquisitions and to acquire different companies?
Yeah, I've been speaking on this this year. So the slides say 123, we acquired two. Now we're still two, but now so far we've done 180. So what I did is I used my science background. I said, hey, let's look at the data. So instead of going to Amazon and all these third-party sources, let's look at the data that we accumulated in 120 businesses and why they fell. Because these are successful businesses and they're going down, right? They're not really toxic assets, but they're distressed assets. What's fascinating is that we found that it's not marketing or branding that's the problem. It's not PPC or listing or front on. It's actually the 4 pillars of foundational businesses that are failing e-commerce. And why? Number one is human resources. There's too much spend on human resources. So people start off with on their own or virtual assistants and so forth. All of a sudden, they want to grow their company. I don't know if this is a Western thing, but everyone's like, instead of saying, "Hey, I'm in charge of $10 million," they like to say, "Hey, I'm in charge of 500 people." I'm like I directly, indirectly manage 500 people. Like I find it astonishing if you're one person you make a $50 million revenue compared to if you do 500 people and you make 50 million, right? So human resources are crazy. I'll give you an example, guys. I was talking to a small e-commerce aggregator, so company that's acquiring, and they were going bust, so they wanted us to acquire. I said, hey, what is this 160,000? They're like, oh, we paid operational manager $160,000. I'm like, I'm sure this guy is brilliant, but why $160,000? He's like, no, you don't understand. He was the logistics manager and he was operating in control for Iraq and Afghanistan. He used to take tanks and bullets in. I'm like, in my head, the first question is like, okay, he does tanks and bullets, but it doesn't take that kind of genius to have 10 ASINs into Amazon, like, or 10 SKUs, right? I'm like, what are you guys doing? So that kind of human resource hiring is poor. And this, staying on human resources, everyone wants to go into Tony Robbins conferences and take the whole team. Huge expenditures. Everyone wants to pay for like their teams to go away on retreats and stuff. I'm like, huge expenditure. You can do that in the corporate level, but you can't do that on this level. So human resources. Second thing we say is poor COGS in terms of this poor unit economics calculations. So they buy something and they forget something. So they're like, oh, we brought this as a container and we sell it like this, but each individual unit is not accounted for. So we have poor unit economics calculations. And the third thing is they don't have enough suppliers. So if we're buying something in e-commerce, we'll have 4 to 5 suppliers. So every supplier you go and talk to, you have a negotiation, a contract, which you can take to the next supplier and show it to them and negotiate your prices down, or you can negotiate your terms. So you have a 90-day term, a 60-day term. What these guys do is they just have one and they make friends, and they think if you go to China and have beer with them, they're like, I've so many Zoom calls. I'm like, oh, he's like family. They're like, dude, it's not your family, it's just fucking supplier, right?
That's right.
What are you talking about? And
I don't care
and
that you went to the KTV with him. He's doing business with you, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
he like you can't. They're not negotiating terms, so they don't. They have poor terms, so they're paying 100% TT straight up. They don't have 30 days or 60-day and 90-day terms. So human resources, poor unit economics, poor supplier management, and the fourth thing is poor logistics. Too many people are paying too much for 3PL. So they have this Q4 fascinating percent. 63% of people that we looked at, they had too much inventory for Q4. They were going on false positive data. Q4 is this kind of miracle period. It never comes through. And they have too much inventory overstocked and they were going throughout. And we viewed 87% of the companies had to change their 3PL because they were like, hey, we're going to use Amazon, or we're going to use somewhere in Long Beach, or, I know Felixstowe in the UK, very expensive. If you go to Ohio, or I don't know, somewhere in Texas, a lot cheaper. So those four things we find are going wrong in businesses in e-commerce. Sorry if that was a long answer, but that's what we find.
No, that's helpful. That's super interesting. Patrick, good.
What kind of headwinds do you face from a quality standpoint with your suppliers in China specifically? My experience in China was when I was in the oil and gas industry. We were over there auditing some outsourced manufacturing, castings and forgings and finished machine parts, and so I recognize that that's probably different from a quality requirement to selling silicone toys and that sort of thing. But nevertheless, there is QC that's required. One of the things that we really struggled with was quality. Do you see that issue? When I was there, this was back in 2012, so it's been a while. But has there been any improvements in the quality output of the products that they're putting out there? And what's kind of been your experience with that?
It depends on your supplier, and you can't stereotype the whole thing. I think it's continuously as a whole game in the last 7 years. What is it? 7 or 6 years I've been in the game. It's improved. So this is what we do. Once we have a new supplier and we like the product, the sample, and so forth, we send a on-ground China inspection team to go and audit the factory, and also then a China-based lawyer to make the terms and so forth. By the way, if you're an entrepreneur starting off, don't pay for a lawyer. You can get cheap auditors for like $100 or something, or $50 or $60. Do that, so that you have an audited factory. And then what we do is we built this SOP is that for the first order, we go and do spot checks and quality control. And if it's a big order, we do loading inspection. So SGS, or in China, it's Kima as well. We can hire. They do all the loading inspection, quality control, each loading, make sure we got that. And then and if you're entrepreneur is starting off, I think the main thing is spot checks, which is a lot cheaper to do. Loading wise, most people load the same way. You're probably getting less units. We do it because we have so much units. So that's different between entrepreneur and small and medium businesses. Then what we try to do is work backwards now. So if we're selling the US or UK marketplaces, we literally tick the boxes. Say, hey, what is the regulation? What are the certificates? What's the ISO or CE or US? What's the US, not USD? Yeah, those kind of standards we want. We put it back into our company supplier. Say, can you just tick list this, make this? We can make a bundle, and we make sure they email us, and we have this email copy, and we just go for a checklist. And then every 3 months we do a spot check again. So that's what's made our quality better. And also we look at what the customer says, and So the customers are not complaining or something's gone wrong. We know that's right. And then we also order random units I order random units to my house. Some of our employees order random units to different countries, and we check that as well. So we're always doing blind checking and randomized checking as well.
Awesome.
Mm.
That's great.
But if you're starting off, you're listening, skip those things. Just make sure that you have a kind of a solid kind of I think a factory audit and also quality checking in terms of random sampling should be enough, because I know the problem is most entrepreneurs, they start off, instead of getting a plan of getting revenue in, they look at doing other things like getting an office or getting employees or getting everything right, getting lawyers and so forth. It gets too expensive and there's no revenue coming in.
And like, I guess for the younger entrepreneurs that are just looking to get started in any business, like, I mean, like, how did you, I mean, you kind of had a transition over to e-commerce. So when you started like learning about it and kind of educating yourself, like, where did you gather your information? How did you decide like what was good advice, what was bad advice? Like, what was that kind of transition process into learning how to start all this? What was that like? And what would you
Yeah,
suggest?
I think it comes down to three things. I think number one, you got to be interested in it, or you won't have. I always talk about emotional drive. People talk about emotion being bad, particularly in the West, but I love emotion because I think emotional fuel is what kind of keeps you going. So emotional fuel that's ignited by passion, ignited by what you are interested in and you're curious in. So emotional drive is not one thing, and also early success. I remember when I thought I wasn't good enough for education. Yeah, one of my lecturers gave me a first class. I don't know what that is in the US for my essay. So I got the highest grade for my essay. I'm like, whoa, I can write an essay, and that was my first piece of work coming out as a dropout into community college. So that early success, if you find it, it gives you enthusiasm and fuel. So I think you've got to find an early success quickly. If you don't, you got to leave it because it's not for you or it's not the right time, right? You got to keep going. You can plug away. There's a difference between persistence and, utter failure. And you got to understand where that is. So you got to plug away at that. So yeah, passion, emotional fuel, persistence at the right timing. And the third thing is networking. Just get out there. Again, when I started e-commerce, came back to the UK, I had all these qualification examples and so forth, but I went on Eventbrite and I just went to all the free Amazon meetups or e-commerce meetups and just met people. All of a sudden, within 6 or 8 months, I was giving networking talks and so forth. My background, obviously, but how I transitioned, how I built back then a seven-figure company in 11 months and so forth. Once you do that, it's like a snowball effect. You learn more and more and more. And also the fourth thing is probably finding a mentor. I was lucky to find mentors, and I'm careful with mentors. I think you learn from all people around you, but you don't base yourself on one person because you got to be you. And most of the time they're just human anyway. So
No doubt. Yeah, that's a great point. The other thing too that that I've experienced is you depending on where you're at in life and in your business or what it is that you're trying to achieve, that kind of drives the mentor that you select. But then if you take advantage of that mentor and their knowledge and experience, at some point it's not that you outgrow them, but the need for that person is no longer there in the mentor mentee kind of dynamic, right? And so now there's a new problem for you to solve, which requires a new person with a certain level of experience that's accomplished different things. And so I think it's totally natural to kind of move from one to the other. But yeah, I'm with you there. That
yeah.
mentors are definitely kind of a shortcut, if you will.
Yeah, and most of the time, it's hard to land one because most of them forget where they started from. Only a very few. And you gotta have, you gotta have significant. Yeah, most of the time you need to give them something. They have to be earning something from you as well. It's a give and take relationship. It's very hard for you to be very charismatic and make someone help you for free. So and after a while, you got to pay up.
No doubt.
Yep. I think a big part of that is just figuring out what you can offer them, whether that's now or some point in the future, and continue to give that back. And it just goes full circle. So, okay. Well, listen, Pradeep, I know we're kind of running down to the end of our time right now. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. Like, getting a chance to hear about your story and everything, all the advice and everything that you share. We really appreciate it.
No, it's been
I'm
great.
expecting some sort of movie being made or mini series or something. Like
Yeah.
this has been an awesome conversation, and yeah, your
No,
stories.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. Lot more to talk about. Thank you very much. I mean, time's kind of flown by.
Yeah.
It's been good. But yeah, good luck with your stuff and good luck to the audience. Obviously, I'm always here on LinkedIn. If anyone wants to shout out, need some help, let me know. I'm quite busy, but I'll try to get to you. And the best thing is, when you help someone out in all these years later, is they came back and they're like, "Hey, you helped me out. Do you remember me?" I'm
Yeah.
like, "No, I don't remember you, but I'm very happy."
Yeah, that was going to be the last thing I was going to ask. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you? Is it LinkedIn, or what
Yeah,
social platforms
so
do you use?
my social media tags on Facebook, Instagram are PK Sacitharan, but
Okay.
LinkedIn is probably my strongest kind of suit and where I respond the quickest. So it's my full name, Pradeep Kumar Sacitharan.
Awesome. All right. Well, Pradeep, thank you again so much. We really appreciate it. It's been great having a chance to speak with you. We'll definitely love to kind of have you on again sometime,
Yeah.
dive deeper into a couple of things, and thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, if I get to the 100 million or 200 million mark, I'm coming back.
Exactly. We'll come back. We'll do the whole thing. Okay. How did you get here?
Yes. All right.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.
Awesome. Sounds
Okay,
good. Thank
bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.